Good afternoon, Curtis. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Albert. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Curtis, I am so excited to have you here on the segment. It's all about the agents. As you know, it's a segment that I put on to really just highlight insurance professionals. This month, I'm dedicating the segment to African Americans in insurance. And today I'm joined by Curtis Mooring, president of Curtis Mooring Insurance Agency. And you guys have been in business for over 57 years plus, strong here locally in San Diego. And it is truly an honor to have you on the segment today. And just take a quick second to introduce yourself, and we'll drive into your story, Curtis.
Okay. My name is Curtis Mooring Jr. I am a second generation independent insurance agent broker here in the state of California in the city of San Diego, as we call it, America's finest city.
Excellent. And tell me a little bit about your father founded the insurance agency back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. But
No,
share a
no,
little bit of
we're
the was it?
way above. We're actually,
Wait a minute.
we go back to 1963.
Wow, wow. So tell me a
My
little bit
dad,
about that story. How did he get started? And
well, actually, in 1962, a lady came to my mom's house. My mom had just was pregnant with my brother, her fifth child. And this lady was asking my mom if she'd like to sell insurance on the side while she was waiting for her fifth child. My dad happened to overhear the conversation. Had stopped in to have lunch, and he was in the kitchen, and she was talking to my mom about selling life insurance. And my mom says, "I don't want to sell life insurance." And my dad walked in. He says, "I'll do that. Everybody needs insurance." So, so my dad signed up, got his life insurance license in 1962, and then in 1963 he got his property and casualty license and opened up his agency. And
Wow, wow.
he started selling property and casualty insurance, but unfortunately, most of the insurance companies were not recruiting, let alone hiring African Americans to sell property and casualty insurance. So
Wow.
he filed a discrimination lawsuit against the Merit Plan Insurance Company out of Los Angeles, California. We
Hmm.
know it as the Merit Plan, a publishing company now, but they were an automobile insurance company at that time. He ended up winning his lawsuit against them. And after he won his lawsuit, it seemed like almost every property and casualty company south of Los Angeles came rushing to get him a
We're giving
contract.
giving him an appointment. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, because he won a suit in 1964. Civil rights legislation was passed in 64, and most of these insurance companies did not have African American insurance reps south of San Francisco. So
Right.
he actually did a contract with a company called INA, which we know today is Cigna, and he got another
Okay.
contract with called Canadian Indemnity, and then Fidelity and Deposit, and there was another company that began with F. I can't even think of the name of it now. They were a high risk auto carrier, and that kicked his business off. And then he started growing the agency after he received that contract with INA, and then he actually partnered with a group of gentlemen who formed a company called Broker Finance, which provided insurance, real estate, and mortgage financing for the African American community in San Diego back in the mid to late 60s. Because, as you know, in the 60s, banks weren't
Yeah.
lending money to African Americans. Mortgage companies didn't want to write loans on African Americans in Southern California as a whole. So they formed their own conglomerate, and they were able to get a HUD finance deal with HUD out of Washington, D.C. to build broker finance. And during that time, my dad was able to build his insurance agency with the realtors referring him homeowner clients and dwelling fire clients over that period of time probably from 1967 all the way up until 1976. And on
Wow.
top of that, go ahead.
No, go ahead. And one of the things that I was going to say, so really, your father was one of probably the first black-owned insurance agencies in San Diego. Would you say?
He wasn't the very first. There had been others, but they had not been able to sustain themselves.
Correct.
So they unfortunately didn't last, maybe probably more than a couple of years apiece. But he was the first one to be able to sustain himself over 10 plus years. So when I joined the firm in 1973, He'd already been operating for 10 years. He already had 5,000 personal lines clients. He'd already been highly successful selling life insurance for INA. He'd won numerous trips selling life insurance for INA. And actually, I have a portrait behind me of where they actually painted this portrait for him, winning consecutive trips of more than 7 years in a row of being a $1 million roundtable producer for INA Life
Wow.
Insurance.
Wow.
And I'll break
That is awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Right here to this day. Is the portraits that my dad was presented in 1974, actually.
Wow. That is amazing.
I know, huh? And I was very fortunate, as you can imagine, to have him as my mentor because he'd already been highly successful selling life insurance, highly successful selling property and casualty insurance. And he actually, his largest client at the time I joined the firm was the largest Black-owned medical facility west of the Mississippi. It was a group of 25 African-American doctors, all former military doctors. They had over 100 plus employees. They operated the largest Black-owned medical facilities west of the Mississippi, larger than any that was in San Francisco, LA, or anywhere else west of the Mississippi at that time.
And you know, he had to overcome obviously a lot of challenges throughout his career, but he was also able to really kind of establish himself within the community. And you know, what were the things, some of the things that worked well for your father, and how did he, you know, overcome some of those challenges that really kind of gave you obviously the opportunity to propel the agency in the future?
I think one of the things that I look back at in my dad's career was that he grew up in a multiracial environment in the city of Philadelphia back in the 30s and 40s. And I think that in itself helped him out a lot because he had friends of all nationalities in Philadelphia at that time. He was a kid in the East Philly, and he had relatives that had businesses throughout Philadelphia. At one time, he had over 65 relatives that lived in and around the city of Philadelphia. And a lot of them had small businesses. So he saw how a lot of them operated that were successful and so forth. So that gave him a foundation. He then came out to San Diego as an experiment for the first black Marine to go through MCRD here in San Diego back in 1950. That was right after Truman signed the bill to integrate the military. But he had already had a childhood of being in an integrated environment. So being only African American at MCRD, he was able to handle all the criticism, the jokes, and everything. And I think that just strengthened his character as a person to be able to be successful in his endeavors in life. I was just blessed to not only be his son, but also to have worked with him as an employee. And for 7 straight years before I went and did my little stint with corporate America for a couple of years with Pacific Telephone. And working in the insurance industry, you got to remember in the 60s and 70s, they didn't have automation at all.
Right.
Your automation was your IBM typewriter, and have the IBM typewriter. I mean, he would constantly upgrade his typewriters and so forth. But hey, IBM typewriter at that time was maybe $900 to $1,100, maybe $1,200 at the most. Where when I started buying computers, they were like $5,000 a terminal. So he was able, fortunately, to build a book of business, and to have it diverse, being commercial and personal lines, and having a division that did life and health, and grow the agency so that when I joined the agency, we had several employees, and he had one employee who had a nursing background, which was really fantastic. Because she was able to help a lot with medical malpractice insurance because she knew most of the medical terminology.
Correct.
I mean, he can figure out, the insurance language and so forth, and go from there as far as billing, coverages and creating risk management concepts for his clients. But having someone that had a nursing background, that just added was a major plus for the agency. I'll put it that way. She was a long-term employee. She actually worked for the agency for over 40 years. She became my employee. She became my employee when I bought the agency in 1986. I had worked for an agency for almost 1 year up in San Francisco called Jarsic Insurance. They sold out to HHR or something like that in the early
HRH,
90s.
yeah, yeah.
HRH, yeah. They stood out to them. I worked for Jarsup for almost a year, and that was a wonderful experience because I could never get hired to work for any of the firms here in San Diego. And the 80s, even though I had a ton of experience, they
Sure.
weren't hiring African Americans in sales positions, which is, you know, the crux of what we're still at to this day, actually, which is sad, really.
Right.
In certain ways,
Right.
I'm talking almost 40 years later, and we still have the same problems going on in the insurance
Right.
industry. But the industry has struggled with diversity in all aspects.
Well, and I agree, and I agree with you. I agree with you completely because it you know, and we have these conversations even till this day, and me and you have had several conversations about that. But you know, it seemed to me early on that you kind of envisioned yourself in this insurance career path, right? Seeing that your father had had some success in building his firm, was that kind of a something that you decided as early on in your young professional career that was the path that you were going to take?
You know, what's interesting about that, Albert, is that initially it was not the path I wanted to take. I actually was working towards, I went to school to become an accountant, and my goal was to be a tax attorney. That was my actual goal that I had in mind. And after I learned how to do taxes, you know, you're accounting major in college, you know, they teach you how to do income taxes and so forth on a low scale, not on a high scale. And then, you know, being in the insurance world and having an accounting background was like a major plus, because the reality is that even before I became my own owner of the firm, I had to handle the books for my dad, actually.
Right.
And so I learned how to do the accounting statements with the different insurance companies. I actually even had the authority to sign his signature on his check in high school and college.
Right. Profit sharing checks, just writing your signature.
$35,000 to $50,000 ago, and I'm like, I'm signing a check for $35,000. I'm signing a check for $50,000. It got to the point where I didn't allow money to intimidate me. I didn't allow numbers to intimidate me, because they were just numbers, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You're dealing with paying a company their money on time. You're dealing with making sure that you verify you collected all the money at that time. Because back then, we didn't have direct bill collection.
Right.
We had agencies doing everything. So you had to balance your agency books out so you could pay the different insurance carriers. So I learned a lot about the administrative side before I got involved in the sales side. And I've always tried to educate and train producers I've hired over the years to learn the administrative side as well as the sales side, because it makes you a better salesperson, because you now can have a conversation with those CPAs and controllers of different companies about why their insurance costs is a certain way, what they need to do to plan ahead of time and so forth, so they can budget properly to manage their insurance costs. And that's the benefit that I took with me to work with national firms. I worked with Cedric James in my early 30s. I worked with Marsh. Marsh bought Cedric James out, and they became my partner in the late 90s. I worked with them on trolley projects for the city of San Diego, convention centers. I worked on the largest construction project at one time, which was a clean water project, which took most of the 90s to rebuild our infrastructure for water here in San Diego, which was over $1 billion project. And my firm had to manage 1,200 contractors on a day-to-day basis, you know, collecting all their data for the workers' comp equation, for the general liability equations. So there was a lot involved in that project. And I was involved on the risk management side of that equation as well, because I sat in and actually I chaired in some cases with the city risk manager the safety meetings involving that project over that period of 7 years. So that in itself was a lot of knowledge, but I had already acquired a lot of pre-knowledge before I was involved in those government contracts, because when you're insuring medical clinics, which I had like 4 nonprofit medical clinics I was responsible for when I first bought my dad out in 1986. And then I had a malpractice crisis to deal with in 1988, where the benefit of having a former nurse on staff and then having studied insurance stuff to know how to structure insurance policies from scratch, I had to build a malpractice policy from scratch due to the malpractice crisis of 1988 to help my nonprofit clinic with their insurance crisis.
And that is a really good point, because I think one of the things, you know, you positioned yourself early on, right? As a Black insurance professional, as a specialist, and I think we've talked about it in the past that there were certain industries that you really took it upon yourself to become a specialist in, and share a little bit of how that impacted you and how that elevated your game per se, right, against other competitors in the space.
Well, first of all, okay, we have an agency that was, it was heavily in personal lines, but we had commercial clients, and we had commercial clients in the construction industry. We had clients in the medical industry, and then we had, general mainstream clients. Mainstream clients are like, restaurants and general businesses and so forth, or service businesses, like plumbing contractors, actually plumbing repair services, things of that nature. Well, I looked at our book of business and I looked at what I wanted to do. And one of the things people always say, follow your passion. My passion basically was I wanted to get involved in doing large scale deals. But I knew that in order to do large scale deals, you got to build a framework in order to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And the framework means that you got to sit down and say, okay, where's your strengths? Where's your weaknesses? What do I need to do to strengthen myself? And how do I position the firm to be able to go after those type of deals? Well, sometimes you'd have to give up something. And in my case, I decided to make a decision with the Junior Chambers of Commerce. It was a opportunity that was presented to me in 1987 to write a group policy for the entire Junior Chambers of Commerce for the state of California. And at that time, they had over 10,000 plus members. They had over 158 chapters. And they asked me to come in, put together a program and bid on a group program for their entire state of California for all the chapters. Mm-hmm. Well, I had relationships with underwriters of different specialty companies, the wholesale brokers over a course of a period of time, because my dad dealt with a lot of wholesale brokers. Because not every major insurance company, as you know, writes the funky stuff, the hard to place, we call in our insurance industry. So I learned how to master that aspect, because that was a very important aspect. A lot of brokers never have to deal with that. They're so used to, dealing Main Street.
Right.
That they have
the Main Street business. Yeah.
Like companies like CNA, where they don't have to actually have to go deal with hard place risk. They just stay within CNA's book of business, or we call it in the insurance industry, their CNA's appetite, and they focus on just that aspect of their business. Whereas I had a firm that was doing medical malpractice, contractors, and then mainstream, on top of having the division that did personal lines insurance, your auto, your home, your boat, your RV, and another part of it that was doing group health insurance, individual health insurance, primary group health insurance, and life insurance. That's where my dad focused his energy on. I decided that I wanted to take my interest and energy and focus strictly on building the P&C side, the property and casualty side of the business, and I wanted to build it doing large deals. And I knew that if I could do large deals, I could tell myself to be able to do contracts with entities like City of San Diego, State of California, the counties up and down the state of California. And that was my goal, basically, was to be able to do those type of deals. And so when the California Junior Chambers asked me to put together a group insurance program, I had a broker I went to that specialized in assisting me on how to structure the deal. And I structured the deal and I ended up winning the contract. And I ended up using, at that time, what we call modern technology, the fax machine.
Right.
You got to remember, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the internet until the 90s, okay?
Right,
so the other side of the coin, okay, you have 150 some chapters sending you requests for special event insurance, and I'm talking about rodeos, carnivals,
everything in there.
Haunted houses. I even insured, and I always laugh about this, I even insured the brochures for the Rose Bowl parade, because they had to store them in a facility for 3 days, and they had to insure that because they had over $500,000 of advertising money.
Right.
So they couldn't afford those brochures to get burned up, and not have the money to replace the dollars they collected from the advertisers. So I ended up insuring the Rose Bowl brochures and for the Pasadena Junior Chamber of Commerce that year that I had the policy in effect. I had the policy in effect from 1988 to 89 for the entire state of California. After that, I ended up insuring a whole bunch of the chapters along with the state organization for probably up until 1990, 98 and 99. But the fun thing about the whole thing was that here I'm insuring all these funky situations, but I'd already dealt with funky situations as a coming up in as a young man in the agency. And I also sat down and did an assessment of what were our strengths, Curtis Moore Insurance Agency, what were the strengths that we had and our weaknesses. And that's how I positioned myself to specialize in certain industries. And I had the fortune of being at a high school that was one of the first high schools to have a computer lab here in San Diego County. And that was Crawford High School over by San Diego State. Right. And because of that, I had basic computer training. And when I was in business school and college, you had to take, Fortran and basic COBOL and basic, computer programming languages back then in the 70s and early 80s, as well as your curriculum. My curriculum at that time was accounting, but you still had to take all of the, the necessary business courses that were associated with that. And in doing so, it just strengthened my skill sets along with having the insurance training that I, procured working with my dad over that period of time. I worked with my dad basically for 11 years before I even bought the agency. So I had a lot of fundamental training in how to manage an agency, how to market an agency, how to build a book of business. And I just took those skill sets and applied those towards, my passion. My passion was going after technology companies. I loved eating out, so I went after a lot of restaurants.
Right.
But what I did that was unique, I think, Albert, when I look back at it, is I didn't just try to sell people a product. Okay? I tried to help them manage their business from a risk standpoint. Because when you're dealing with nonprofits, they don't have a lot of money, so they need a risk manager. So I fine-tuned my risk management skills working with the nonprofits back in the 80s and early 90s. And I fine-tuned a lot of it was due because the nonprofit medical clinics.
Mm-hmm.
So
you understood the intricacies of how to structure the policies, right? And I think one of the things that's very interesting is that what you talk about is you spent 11 years, right, working with your father, learning about the agency, but within that time frame, you decided, okay, what is going to be the impact that I am going to make in the agency? And you really took the time to understand what it meant to be a risk advisor. And I think that's what really kind of sets you apart, right? Is you were providing risk advising to these companies. And with the accounting background, you understood the math and the numbers, right? Of what it took to operate a budget.
Yeah. But it's more just that. I walked in meetings with guys who were 15, 20 years older than them, talking about the partnership I had with Cedric James before they were bought out by Marsh. And these guys were smart guys, wealth of knowledge, but they didn't know numbers.
Mm-hmm.
They would, and because I could figure the numbers out real quick, I'm sitting in the meetings and guys, we can't price it this way. We have this deal, we have that. Because I understood the backroom processing costs associated with doing large deals. I also knew that, hey, if you understand the backroom processing, I mean that your competitors got to figure out the same thing too, or else they're going to either overprice or underprice their competitive bid, to win the deal, or overstate their capabilities, not knowing how to manage the processing side. Having dealt with processing for 11 years on top of sales, on top of marketing, on top of accounting. It was like, I've always told people, everything is a stepping stone. Everything is a building block in the insurance industry. The more you learn about other aspects, you can apply them to other aspects in the insurance industry. People say, in other words, it's the products, understanding how the workers' comp equation works, understanding how the general liability equation works, understanding how the rates work on property and so forth. And I think that in itself helped me with the fundamentals that I was able to grow my skill sets in a pretty speedy manner, because I was the second African American in the history of California to serve on the largest insurance risk pool for automobile and commercial vehicles in the world, the California Automobile Signers pool. I was appointed by John Garamendi in 1992. I finished out a term of a person who stepped down, and then I ended up serving my own term. So I served from 92 to 95 to when Chuck Quackenbush became the Department of Insurance Commissioner. He picked his own people after that. But I had the pleasure of serving on the largest insurance pool in the world, and at that time we dealt with so many funky situations. We dealt with the space shuttle coming back from space. We had to deal with the risk management associated with that. That just grew my risk management skill sets because we're dealing with transporting space shuttle from California back to Florida.
Right. And that's really an interesting point that you make, because insurance can lead you to all different types of opportunities, right? And to learn about all different types of industries. And, from an early stage, we've talked about this before as well, is that technology was something that you've always spent time in, not only learning about what the risks are to come, but how to anticipate, right, certain risks or certain things that clients should consider. And this has always been, I think, you had talked about a passion of yours, correct?
Yeah, and because of that, I was able to create one of the first websites in the country. And I'm the only broker in the history of the insurance industry that actually built a product for the internet that I won awards on and so forth. And it was the digital brochure. I had a client of mine called Mo Vision that was creating digital brochures for the movie industry up in Hollywood.
Okay.
I asked them, could they help me build a digital brochure for Curtis Mooring Insurance? And they said, sure. So I built the very first digital brochure for insurance sales in the country. Now, I have to tell you, there was a digital brochure that was done before mine, but it was done by a company called Prudential Insurance Company. And it was a marketing brochure that Prudential Insurance Company built their digital brochure on. I built my digital brochure for sales. So I created the first digital brochure for sales of insurance, where you could actually go stick my digital brochure in your computer. You could actually plug in all the information on the digital brochure and upload it to my website. And we can then, put together an insurance proposal for you and send it back to you.
API integration way before its time, right? This is insure tech at the beginning stages, right? Pioneering.
Well, it's really weird because I was invited as the first broker in the history of the United States to speak at NACOLA. Do you know who NACOLA is?
No, not familiar.
NACOLA is the National Conference of Insurance Legislators.
Oh,
they're
interesting.
all insurance legislators from all over the United States. And I was invited to speak as one of the panel speakers at their cyber conference. And that was in March of 1997.
Wow.
And I was able to
No, it's just so interesting because you're talking about these things, and today there are items that are so prevalent, right? We constantly hear the conversation about cyber risk and information technology and social engineering and all these terminologies, but these were things that you were dealing with back in the 90s. And you saw that, hey, we have to address these issues because they're going to continue to grow.
And it's interesting to say it because the generation of brokers that are out there today, they grew up with technology, so they know technology. What they don't know is they don't know the fundamentals. They don't know the background and the understanding. And I always say that if you're going to do something and do it well, you kind of have to study the history. I mean, one of the best things that helped me out a lot as a kid when I first started with my dad. My dad had a wealth of books to read in his library in his office. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important book I read at the time, I even had my son read this book, was called Think and Grow Rich. Because his whole model of Curtis Mooring Insurance was Think Mooring. I changed it to Think CMI to modernize it. But it was always about thinking. Now, he got the word think because the 50s, IBM used the word think IBM. He then took that
Oh,
model,
God.
applied it to think mooring for insurance.
For insurance.
And what he did
It's
was,
interesting because I always wanted to ask you why think CMI, and now I finally got the answer.
yeah, it was interesting because he actually would say think sea mooring. And the purpose of saying think sea mooring was to go sea mooring for insurance.
Right.
Because my dad was in the advertising business before he actually got into insurance sales. He actually ran a local newspaper here in San Diego that when he ran it, they threw over 5,000 community newspapers twice a week and so forth. So as a little kid, I was involved with folding those papers up before they were
Folding
sold
those
the next day.
papers.
Yeah.
Hopefully you
So,
got paid for
he
it.
had,
Hopefully you got paid for
yeah.
it.
No, you don't get paid. You're lucky to have a house, a roof over your head, and 3 meals, So we didn't complain. You're a kid,
Yeah.
you're 5, you're 6 years old,
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Doing it, It's fun, actually,
Yeah.
when you think about it. But, Albert, when I look over all the things about my career, and the things I enjoyed the most it wasn't actually meeting with people and having conversations, but it really helped people that are struggling with how to deal with critical issues and how to facilitate them properly. And, I insured a lot of nonprofits, and I insured a lot of large nonprofits. And one of the largest nonprofits I had for over 20 some years was a grew from a $3 million nonprofit to over $100 million nonprofit.
Wow.
I had the fortune of riding that curve with them, growing my risk management skill sets and my insurance knowledge while they're still their broker and being able to experience that growth that they had occurred and helping them manage. Because at the time they reached their plateau, they had over 200 locations, they had over 200 vehicles, and they had over 2,500 employees. So, and so I'm helping them deal with the workers' comp issues. I'm helping them deal with their facility issues, their transportation issues. We even developed for them a concept that I got working at Pacific Telephone was a driver test, a company driver test. Even though the people have their driver's license from the DMV, you still want to make sure they're going to drive your vehicle safely. So you have to get in the vehicle and ride with them and verify how their driving habits are and so forth. Well, I learned that concept working at Pacific Telephone for the brief 2 years I spent at Pacific Telephone. That was a concept that they had in place on how to create safe drivers. And then naturally they use certain concepts, no left turns, do right turn. I don't care if you had to go around the block to come around to make the turn. They preferred no left turns because there's less accidents that happen. So just little things you pick up and so forth. Working, in the insurance industry or helping clients to manage their risk more effectively. My background in doing directors and office insurance back in the late 80s all the way up until now allowed me to help clients when they were purchasing or acquiring other companies, to say, let me just take a look at your purchase
how to protect the officers of the company, right? And acknowledging what their responsibilities were. Yeah.
Yeah, but also make sure that client's not taking on any risk that you don't want to take on from that organization that they're purchasing. In other words, making sure they do a risk management check on that other organization, making sure that organization has insurance products in place to protect them in case that organization misrepresented their information or to take care of the claims that might arise from that situation. Just little things like that.
And that's one of the things that you've picked up so many so many aspects of the business that you've been able to touch on, whether it was errors and omissions or directors and officers and all these different specialties that you learn. And it's really you became a student, right? You became a student of of your craft, right? You take pride in your craft, which I think is extremely important. And you said something very important too, is that you are looking to help your clients, right? Meeting people is part of it, but really being an advisor and an ally, right, to their business or to their homeowners insurance or whatever it is, you're actually advising them and protecting them, right? So you're in a way you're giving back. There's an honorable sense of doing business when you're in this path.
It is. And, Albert, I always say this, and I tell clients all the time, if you focus on the price, you're missing out on being insured properly. Let's focus on getting insured properly then we can work on bringing the price down or controlling the price. Because if you're controlling the price, you're actually saving them money in the long run. And you're getting clients to understand that takes a lot of effort and energy. Because a lot of people are saying, well,
it does.
It's cheap. But they haven't taken the time to do a detailed comparison. What are you buying? Do you know what you're buying? And I blame that on the insurance industry because I think we fail to educate the consumers properly on understanding how insurance truly works. And
on the focusing on the coverage and the protection versus just selling on price.
Correct. And because people come for price, they leave for price. We've always known that.
Yeah.
Those of us who've been in business long enough know. So you have to focus on getting them insured properly. You have to focus on getting them to make sure they have the right systems in place to run their organization properly. If they don't, giving them the tools or helping them find the tools. In my case, I've always either seek to help them find the tools or give them tools. Like I created a program in the early 90s here in the city of San Diego for the restaurant industry. And what I did was a risk management program that I developed with a business coach I had at the time. And it encompassed not only just safety training, but we also had a bilingual training specialist and safety training. We had an employment law attorney that helped assist the clients with structuring their employment contracts, or if they had issues associated with employee filing, claims for harassment or abuse or whatever. This law firm specialized in labor law for management. So they were able to help my clients from that perspective and so forth.
So partnering and bringing all these tools within one group, right, to just really solidify the risk management. And Curtis, we're about to.
We call it our CMI team, Albert, and I took that whole concept. And not only did we apply that CMI team concept to the restaurant industry, we applied it to the technology industry. I was fortunate to insure one of the first companies in America to develop a smartphone. They did it before the BlackBerry. Yeah. I know, I'm throwing out all these old names.
I know.
But you realize that when you've done things that were first in the industry, the knowledge that you have, you build upon that knowledge. You don't shrink it. You grow. Your experiences just continue to grow with you. It's like applying, like wine. They say wine gets better as it ages. Well, as insurance brokers, if you really learn your tools and crafts of the industry, you just get better. The challenge is getting people to appreciate that. The challenge is getting people to understand that. And, because, and the challenge is also educating the underwriters on how to do it. Because I educated a lot of underwriters on how to do technology back in the 90s. A lot of them didn't know technology.
They weren't familiar. They weren't familiar with those risks. And as we get ready to wrap up a little bit here, we've talked about it, you and I, on other conversations about bringing more youth into the industry, and you've had several people that have come through your office, and you've helped mentor, and they've gone on to do other things. But as when you give out advice to people or individuals that want to get into the industry, especially other African American individuals that want to pursue a career in insurance, what kind of advice would you give them? What would you say today with all your experience?
First of all, I want to say this. This is something I think that the independent insurance agent system in California, I don't know about across the country. I can only talk about California because I was involved with the education committee out of the independent insurance agent brokers state office initially. It was called Project Invest. San Diego had a chapter called Project Invest. I've always felt that project, even though we were doing it only in certain schools here in San Diego County, that project should have been expanded throughout the entire county, throughout the whole state, because that Project Invest was teaching high school kids, like what I learned, basics of how to run an independent insurance agency, how the underwriting's done, how the sales done, how the backroom processing is done. And I think the lessons that those kids receive from working in that class environment, that one semester or year, I think in some cases, some of the schools will do it for a whole year. The things they carry forward the rest of their lives, because everyone needs insurance, as my dad said. Everyone needs insurance, but not everyone understands insurance. And I think teaching the youth how to understand insurance will benefit the insurance agency by far more than anything else they can do. creating more project invest throughout the entire country will facilitate the growth that the insurance industry needs for future employees, future salespeople, future administrative aspects
Underwriters.
of insurance.
Right.
Because you and I both know the insurance world is a microcosm of everything. I mean, you have
Correct.
scientists
Yeah.
involved, you have actuaries involved, you have weather people involved, and insurance. You have, as we all know, tons of legal people. You have construction people doing the safety and so forth. So there's nothing that the insurance world doesn't touch.
Correct.
We just don't
Right.
tell the consumers the opportunities that are available because we have kept it too close knit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think we need to expand it now if we want to find people that want to find the industry a opportunity of growth and an opportunity to expand the horizon. Because to me, it's always been a learning concept and a learning process and a growing process. You know, Albert, when I served on that Flying Risk Board, prior to that, I was always curious of what created the California Fair Plan. A lot of people don't know.
Right.
The California Fair Plan was created back in 1968 because of the riots in the inner city and the wildfires in the counties of California.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, there was a black woman named E.G. Bowen, started an agency in Brooklyn, New York in 1953. She went to Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York, and persuaded him to pass legislation to create New York Fair Plan in 1968, the first Fair Plan, the New York Fair Plan, to deal with the inner city issue of discrimination in the insurance industry for redlining. Redlining still occurs today, technically speaking, but can you imagine that here's a black woman who was struggling to run an insurance agency, comes up with a concept that over 29 states have adopted since then.
Right. And that's, and that's vital history, right? That, this is part of the reason why I'm doing this too, because there is so much history in the industry, for African Americans and the contributions that we've made into the industry. And it's important that people know that, Curtis, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today. This has been great to hear, your history, the knowledge that you've picked up. And for everybody, I would say, continues to think CMI, right? Think CMI for your insurance needs. And as a local San Diegan, I carry you, deep in my heart for all that you do. And I know you're very involved in the community, so I appreciate that and continue to do your thing. And I know you're kind of on your way to call it a day and ride into the sunset. But as you continue,
I got a little bit left. I got a little bit left.
I think you got a little bit more to give. So I'm looking forward to continue to work with you, Curtis. But thank you so much for your time.
Albert, thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about Curtis Mooring Insurance and the history of my agency and my experiences in the insurance industry. I wish you well. I wish CNA well. And thanks, CMI.
Thank you.